Hey everybody, it's that time. It's monthly channel update and Patreon Q&A time, and the biggest update is that the Patreon is going to be changing quite a bit in January, and the Q&A is going away, and the reason is, if you watch these, you know that basically one person is the only one taking advantage of the Q&A tier. So essentially this is going to be the last one of these formatted Q&As, and starting in January we will be moving to a monthly Patreon only stream, and then if you have any questions you can ask me there. And then in the future I'll probably do Q&As for like big subscriber numbers and stuff like that, but it just wasn't having the effect that I wanted to have, which is that I wanted people to raise their pledges or whatever, or you know, there are people who are at that level that don't ask ask questions. So it just wasn't working the way that I hoped it would. So we'll be changing to a monthly Patreon only stream, and that won't be at any particular level. Anybody who contributes to the Patreon will be able to watch the stream as it happens, and then eventually the stream will be made public, but at the time it's happening, the only people who will be able to chat and watch and participate are going to be Patreon supporters. So look forward to that. The other thing is that by the time you're seeing this, if you're a Patreon, you might have had both videos. The second video this month is not a normal Obscural Games. It's actually a video about the Mister project and about me making a Mister, which is a little different than what I've done, but I kind of want to branch out and do stuff. It's a little different than what, than just the normal, you know, whatever. So, but anyways, let's go ahead and... So, as usual, all of this month's questions come from Joel, and Joel asks, Sega CD versus TurboGrafx CD, which CD add-on do you prefer? If we're talking about the TurboGrafx CD, probably the Sega CD, because the TurboGrafx CD didn't get a ton of support here in the United States. If we're talking about that format, that's just a generic term that you're using, and you're including the PC Engine CD and the Super CD and the arcade card games and all that stuff, then the Turbo CD for sure, because the PC Engine CD had more games on CD than on HuCard, and the library is just, even though the only English release of Snatcher is on the Sega CD, which I'm very grateful for. There is also a version of Snatcher in Japanese on the PC Engine CD. Yeah, I mean, there's just, for me, if you're talking about Japanese libraries, it's no contest. But if you're talking about US libraries, Sega CD. Castlevania versus Mega Man, which is the all-around better franchise. This includes any offshoots like Kid Dracula, Haunted Castle, Mega Man Zero, ZX, Battle Network, etc. Boy, I mean, I like them both. I don't know that I could really make a choice. The Castlevania series probably has more games that I think are really good, but the Mega Man series has some really good, some of my favorite games. Mega Man 2 is one of my favorite games of all time. Mega Man X is one of my favorite Super Nintendo games. Mega Man X4 is one of my favorite PlayStation games. So there's stuff going on there, but I think overall, in terms of just like the raw percentage of quality games, I would probably go with Castlevania, but like not by much, just barely. What are some of your favorite exploits in gaming? Such as using the bow on Rocksteady and NES Ninja Turtles, blind spots and shoot 'em ups where bosses can't hit you, that kind of thing. This is actually funny you ask this, because I was just checking out Ninja Gaiden on the Switch Online thing last night, and my favorite exploit, one of them certainly, is using the jump and slash on the bosses in Ninja Gaiden, because I had no idea that worked for a really long time. Like when I was a kid, I didn't realize that you could take out bosses, because bosses don't get any invincibility frames, so when you use the jump and slash on a boss in NES Ninja Gaiden, it just, like, it nukes them. And I had no idea about that for the longest time. And actually, just last night, I discovered that the second stage boss, Bomberhead, the guy who he swings the thing and then he swings it in front of him, if you hit just his weapon, you can destroy his weapon, and then he just walks around. And I didn't know you could do that until last night, because I accidentally missed him but hit his chain with the jump and slash, and it blew up. I don't know how many hits that would take with your sword, but it is possible to destroy his weapon, and I didn't know that. So that's one of my favorite, if not my favorite, exploits, but also because it makes the game much more possible. Like, every time I've beaten NES Ninja Gaiden, it's because I've used the jump and slash to just eat the boss's health meter, the last 3 bosses, you know. I can get there pretty reliably. Like last night, I in a single pretty short session, I made it to stage 6, but then, you know, it's a bit of a time sink to get, you have to get to the boss room, do the jump and slash, and then you lose your sub weapon, so usually I get killed by Jakio, and then have to go through the whole stage again and fight him again. So, but yeah, jump and slash is probably my favorite, one of my favorite, if not my favorite. The PacMan safe spots are, I mean, that's a classic, right? You can park PacMan in certain places in the original PacMan, and the ghosts never ever go to certain places in the maze. You can just put him there and leave. And actually, that's how people who play very high level PacMan, like if they have to take a drink or use the bathroom or whatever, they just park PacMan in a safe spot and then go do whatever and come back to their game. So that's got to be one of them too. The one where, and I'm not sure if it's an exploit or if it was put in there on purpose, but the Galaga, there's a way to make it so that enemies stop shooting at you in Galaga. And I'm not sure if that's an intentionally placed trick or if it's exploiting the game code. I think it's the latter, but I'm not positive on that. So those would be probably some of my favorites. You don't see those as much in modern games. Although I guess if you watch speedruns, there's a lot of stuff where people can like fall through walls and stuff that they're not supposed to be able to do. So, but I feel like that's less frequent the more modern games get. And then as soon as it happens, they patch them out, right? So his last question, boy, I hope this isn't going to be too long. What makes your favorite games your favorite games? Like, usually it's not just one thing, because for a game to be that good, for me to think of that highly of a game, it has to do a number of things very well. But like for Contra, which is my favorite game of all time, I did a birthday stream earlier this month. You can check that out. I'll put a thing wherever. I played Contra, I played through Contra. Contra's like my favorite game of all time because it just feels really good. And everything about it feels really good. The shooting feels good, the jumping feels good, you run at the right pace, you're sort of centered in the screen enough so that it's... In certain places you can sort of run up to the edge of the screen, but mostly the game keeps you in a spot where you can see what's coming at you, you don't feel like you're running in molasses, but you're not going so fast that, you know, enemies just pop up and murder you out of nowhere. Although there are a couple places where enemies do pop up and shoot at you really quickly, especially in the second to last stage. But it's just the whole feel of Contra is really what makes me love it so much. You know, I think in something like Symphony of the Night, it's the way you can explore the castle. Like recently, Mark Brown, Game Maker's Toolkit, made a video about Symphony of the Night that was sort of critical about there is sort of an aimless feeling he feels. But for me, and I just sort of really, this was revived in me playing Hollow Knight. The thing about Symphony of the Night and the Metroidvania games typically that I really gravitate towards and really like is that it doesn't wall you off so much from the beginning that it's really obvious which way to go, and it's not so wide open that you don't have any clue what to do next, but it's just open enough that exploring is its own pleasure, and that there is a chance that you'll wander into a place you're not really supposed to go yet, but if you're good, you can get by it and maybe get some super good weapons, or super good for the moment that you're in, weapons or armor or items or upgrades that will make sort of backtracking and doing the next thing easier, sort of sequence breaking without intentionally doing it, that kind of thing. I think that's what makes a really great Metroidvania. So like in the case of Symphony of the Night, the fact that it's pretty open from the beginning gives you that feeling. You know, Ms. PacMan is one of my favorite games of all time, and that's just, again, it's sort of the pinnacle of what it is. I mean, maze chase games were a dime a dozen in the early 80s, and Ms. PacMan just does it right. There's enough different mazes, the monsters move around the maze in such a way that there are no safe spaces like there are in Pac-Man, but you don't generally feel overwhelmed, but they're adaptive, so it keeps the game fresh. God Hand is a game that I think is just so totally unique and gives you such an amount of control over how you approach different situations. That's a big one for me. Games that let you approach a problem from multiple angles. Now, in God Hand, the problem is always the people need to be punched in the face. But you get this suite of moves that builds as you move through the game, and you can choose them in any way, in any order that you like. And that's what really makes that game work for me. And it's the same thing with like Metal Gear Solid 3 in particular. And Metal Gear Solid 5, which are the ones that those are like my top ones, is like 3 and 5. And it's just because the game gives you a toolkit and sort of tells you like, okay, figure it out how to get from here to there, figure out how to beat this boss, and and do it. There's like 4 different ways you can beat the end in Metal Gear Solid 3. You can use the heat vision to track his footprints. You can try to lure his parrot out with food. You can you do all these different things. You can just shoot him in his wheelchair from a long ways away, and then you don't even fight him. You fight the Ocelot unit. All this stuff, like, so choice is a big one for me with games that I love. But again, a tightly designed thing without a lot of choice, like Contra, is also great. Mega Man 2 just really nails the music, the levels, I don't know. That's really about all I can put together on that stuff.